It happened on a Thursday, a quiet afternoon that smelled like damp earth and fresh rosemary. I was pruning the hydrangeas by the porch when I heard footsteps, measured, familiar, and decades too late. I looked up, and there they were, my parents, Raymond and Gwen Harper. I hadn't seen them in 21 years. Not since the night they pushed me out the door with a folded $20 bill and a single sentence. Figure it out yourself. And now here they stood. My father in a wool coat far too heavy for spring. My mother clutching her purse like she was about to sell something. Both older, of course. Smaller, as if the years had eaten parts of them. Their eyes searched mine, desperate to read a welcome. I offered none. "Louisa," my mother said, her voice sticky with a sweetness I didn't buy. "You look well." I said nothing. My pruning shears hung loosely in one hand. My father stepped forward. "We didn't come to fight. We're just in a bit of a situation. Jasmine's tuition is due. It's a prestigious program in London. Law and global governance, very selective." I blinked. "Jasmine." I echoed. "You're here about her?" "She's your sister," my mother snapped. "No," I said. "She was your favorite." My mother's nostrils flared. She looked at the ground for half a second, then pulled something from her purse. A thermos. I thought it was coffee, maybe tea, but then, without a word, she flicked open the lid and hurled the entire contents at me. Cold water. Sharp. Smelling faintly of lemons and old plastic. It hit my face, my neck, my chest. I didn't flinch. I wiped it away slowly with the sleeve of my cardigan. The same gray cardigan I had worn when my youngest was born. The same one I wore the day Uncle Theo moved in with us for good. "Is this your way of convincing me?" I asked quietly. My mother looked stunned. My father reached for me, as if to pat my arm like I was still 12. I stepped back. "I gave you everything we had left," he said. "Now we're just asking for help. Jasmine needs. I don't care what she needs." The words came out before I could stop them. There was a moment, a silence so deep I could hear the wind shift in the trees behind the house. My mother looked at me like I had grown horns. My father's mouth hung open, but no sound came. 21 years ago," I continued, "you made a choice. Jasmine was the golden child, the one worth investing in, the one worth loving out loud. You called me a burden, a failure, and you told me, and I quote, 'We only need one daughter.'" My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I stepped aside from the doorway, but not to invite them in. I pointed to the gravel path leading back to the street. "You chose Jasmine. Now live with that choice." My mother's lips trembled. "How can you be so cold?" I tilted my head. "You raised me to be disposable. I learned from the best." She looked ready to speak again, but I closed the door. Not slammed, just closed, quietly, deliberately, like ending a book I'd finished long ago. Inside, the house was warm. The kettle clicked off. My youngest daughter giggled from the living room where she was coloring. "Theo! Uncle Theo!" peeked around the kitchen door with an apron tied crookedly around his waist. "Was that—" "Yes," I said, wiping the last drop of lemon-scented water from my collarbone. "They came. And they left." He nodded, unsaid things passing between us like wind through old oak branches. I sat down at the table, next to the mug he'd poured for me. The steam rising from it felt like home. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. But deep down, somewhere between my ribs and my throat, something moved. Not guilt, not regret, just something. Maybe it was the memory of Jasmine's face when we were kids, pressed against my bedroom door, whispering, "Don't leave me alone with them." Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the first crack in a wall I didn't realize I'd built around myself. When I was 8, our house still smelled like fresh bread on Sundays and lemon wax on the floorboards. There was a grand old oak tree outside, its branches scratching against my window like it was whispering secrets only I could hear. Back then, the Harper home wasn't a place I feared. It was just home. We lived in Savannah, Georgia, a big, old Victorian house passed down from my grandparents, Margaret and Thomas Whitmore. They were the kind of people who made everything feel gentle. Grandma made jam from figs and wrote handwritten notes with each jar. Grandpa hummed jazz tunes while painting by the porch. When they were alive, the house had rhythm, and when they were gone, the silence took on a different tone. The accident happened 2 weeks after Jasmine's 3rd birthday. A truck ran a red light. Just like that, gone. No godbis. No slow fading. Just a call in the middle of the night and 2 cold beds that would never be slept in again. I remember the funeral. I wore a black dress with sleeves that itched my arms and shoes that were too tight. Jasmine sat on my lap the whole time, asking why no one was smiling. She didn't understand, but I did. At least, I thought I did, until I looked at my father's face. While my mother wept into a handkerchief and relatives whispered in pews, my father was smiling. Not a polite smile, not a nervous twitch, a real smile. One corner of his mouth lifted like he'd just closed a profitable deal. His eyes scanned the room as if he was already calculating who would inherit what. And when he noticed me staring, he winked. That moment never left me. It embedded itself in a place I didn't have words for yet. I remember clutching Jasmine tighter and whispering to no one, "Don't let him win." After the funeral, the house changed. No more Sunday bread, no more jazz, just a thin layer of dust settling over the piano keys. My mother, Gwen, sank into a quiet sort of bitterness. She cleaned obsessively, scrubbed tiles that weren't dirty, folded towels twice. She stopped hugging us, stopped looking me in the eyes. Meanwhile, my father took over everything. The finances, the kitchen schedule, the way we breathed. And Uncle Theo, our gentle, pale-skinned uncle with soft hands and a lingering cough, became his favorite target. Theo was my mother's younger brother. He had lived with us as long as I could remember. Frail from birth, never able to hold a full-time job, but he did odd things, freelance drawing, restoring old books, caring for Grandpa's garden. He moved quietly through the house like a shadow with warm eyes. When Grandpa was alive, my father never dared raise his voice at Theo. But now he unleashed it all. "You're a grown man and still freeloading," my father would bark across the dinner table. "Can't even mow the damn lawn." Theo would simply nod, say, "I'm sorry," then excuse himself to the garage, where he kept his sketch pads and worked in silence. I asked him once, "Why don't you say something back?" He smiled faintly and said, "Because I need the roof more than I need to be right." The first time I saw Theo cry was on the anniversary of Grandma's death. I found him in the laundry room, holding one of her aprons. It was yellow, with a daisy stitched on the pocket. He looked up, embarrassed, and wiped his face quickly. "I miss her too," I whispered. He pulled me into his arms. "She would have been so proud of you, Louisa, of your kindness." That night, I slept curled up on the floor beside his room. I didn't feel safe in mine. In those years, Jasmine was too young to understand much, but she was observant. She clung to me like a vine to a tree, following me everywhere, even when our parents weren't looking. She chose me, always me, until one day she didn't. It began subtly. "You know Jasmine's so clever," my mother would say, sipping her tea. "She reads so quickly. She must get it from me." My father chimed in louder. "No, she gets it from my side." My brother was a surgeon. "Not your daughter," I muttered once. "Your investment." They didn't hear me, or pretended not to. That's how it started. The measuring, the comparisons, the way Jasmine's drawings were hung on the fridge while mine disappeared. The way I was called responsible when I babysat but never bright. The way my name stopped appearing in conversations about the future. Jasmine was the light. I was the shadow she left behind. The shift in our family was like a slow rot. You don't see it at first. Then one day, the floor caves in. I just didn't know then how far it would fall. At 12, I started keeping count. How many times I washed dishes without being thanked. How many times Jasmine was called gifted in a single week. How many meals I skipped because I forgot to vacuum the stairs. By 13, I'd learned that silence was safer than protest. By 14, I could predict my father's mood from the sound of his footsteps in the hallway. Jasmine took her IQ test at 6. I still remember the laminated envelope and the way my father's eyes lit up when they saw the number. 151. That's my DNA, he boomed, as if he'd just cloned Einstein. My mother clapped her hands. She's a miracle. They cheered. And just like that, the world I lived in vanished. Tutors were hired. A strict schedule was set. Jasmine would wake at 6 a.m. for piano, then reading comprehension, then math enrichment. She had no time to clean her own room or feed the cat. That was now my job. You'll handle the chores from now on, my mother said, handing me a long list taped to the refrigerator. Think of it as supporting your sister's success. And I did. At first, I folded laundry while Jasmine practiced scales. I swept the front porch while she solved puzzles far above her grade. I wanted to help. I wanted to belong. But over time, the list grew longer. My name disappeared from birthday cakes. My report cards were ignored. And the girl who once clung to my leg during thunderstorms, she stopped waiting for me to walk her to school. One Friday night, I came home from school later than usual. I had stayed back to help clean up after the science fair. I thought they'd be proud until I walked into the house. The living room was full of bags, plastic ones, luggage, a box with my name on it in thick red marker. What's this? I asked. My father sat on the arm of the couch, eating peanuts. My mother stood with her arms crossed. You're 15 now, she said like it was a curse. We've decided. Jasmine needs more space, more focus. She's applying to the gifted boarding academy next year, and we can't have chaos in the house. I'm not chaos, I whispered. My father scoffed. You're not helpful either. Unless you can contribute financially, there's no room for you here. He tossed an envelope at my feet. I opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a mock rental agreement in my name. $1,200 per month. A joke. A cruel, calculated joke. I'm in high school, I said. I don't even have a job. Then you can't stay. They drove me to the train station that night. Didn't even walk me to the platform. As the car pulled away, my mother rolled down the window and called out, "Try your uncle. He's used to living with disappointments." It was dark, colder than Savannah had a right to be in spring. I had a backpack with one change of clothes, a water bottle, and $17 in singles and coins. I bought a ticket and waited, heart pounding in my throat, for the next train to Portland. 3 transfers, 7 hours, no sleep. I arrived at Uncle Theo's building just after dawn. The door opened before I even knocked. His eyes scanned my face, tired, puffy, streaked with dried tears, and I saw something shift in them. Not surprise, not pity, anger. "What did they do?" he asked, his voice low and shaking. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. Just sobs. Loud, broken sobs that filled the hallway. He pulled me inside and wrapped a blanket around me. His tiny apartment smelled like old books and cinnamon toast. "I'm so sorry," I cried. "For what?" he asked, guiding me to the couch. "For being too much. Or not enough. I don't even know anymore." He knelt beside me, took my hand. "I might not have much, Louisa," he said softly, "but if you'll let me, I want to be your parent." I looked at him, really looked. His thin frame, his tired eyes, his hands, rough with calluses from working odd jobs. He didn't offer comfort. He offered commitment. And for the first time in my life, I said yes. That night, I slept in a borrowed t-shirt, under a patched quilt that smelled faintly of mint. The quiet in Theo's home wasn't heavy. It was healing. There were no framed awards on the walls, no piano keys being pressed in the next room, only peace, and the steady sound of a man who had every reason to give up, choosing instead to show up. We didn't have much. The apartment Uncle Theo lived in had peeling paint near the window frames and radiators that clanked like angry ghosts in winter. The kitchen was barely big enough for two people to stand in. But that place, that quiet little second-floor walk-up with its creaky floorboards and second-hand curtains, was the first place that ever felt like home. We lived simply. He worked part-time restoring antique furniture at a dusty little shop down the block. I helped on weekends, dusting, polishing brass handles, sometimes just sitting nearby with homework while he mended a drawer like it was a living thing. At school, I told no one the truth, just that I'd moved in with my uncle for family reasons. But the difference showed. I stopped jumping when someone raised their voice. I stopped waiting for people to ask me about Jasmine. I started sleeping without waking up in the middle of the night. Theo didn't have children of his own, but you wouldn't know it from the way he remembered every little thing, my math test dates, the way I liked my grilled cheese extra crispy, how I hated the feeling of wet socks. Every evening he'd ask, "How was your day?" and actually wait for an answer. Not with judgment, not with distraction, just quiet presence. He never called me a failure. He never asked me to be anyone else. He simply said, over and over, "You're doing great, Lou," even when I wasn't. When I turned 17, he handed me a birthday card with a single sentence. "I'm proud of the person you are, not just the things you do." I kept that card in my backpack for years. It lived longer than any other possession I had. Money was always tight, but Theo made things work. He taught me how to stretch rice and beans, how to patch my own socks, how to make soup from nothing but bones and memory. And he never took a cent from me, not even when I started earning. After school, I worked shifts at a library, then a local cafe. I saved everything, not because he asked, but because I knew one day I'd need to give him back something more than thank yous. By the time I turned 19, I had enough for community college. He cried when I got in. Not big sobs, just quiet tears behind glasses that fogged up too fast. "Your parents would have said it wasn't good enough," I told him. He shook his head. "But I'm not your parents, am I?" 2 years later, I graduated with honors in environmental science. Then came a full scholarship to a university in Oregon. Theo came to the ceremony in an old brown suit and borrowed shoes. He clapped the loudest. We took a photo, just the two of us, me in cap and gown, him holding a paper cup of juice, and smiling like the sun had cracked open just for us. It's the only graduation picture I keep framed. Life moved. I moved with it. I got a job at a conservation center in the Pacific Northwest, working with reforestation projects and urban wildlife teams. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered, and it was mine. I married a man who didn't ask me to shrink. We had 2 children, both curious and kind, and Theo became Grandpa Theo without hesitation. He carved wooden toys for them, read books in funny voices, taught them how to tie knots and compost banana peels. Sometimes I'd catch him watching them from across the room, hands folded, eyes wet. I never asked what he was thinking. I already knew. We offered to move him in after the second baby was born. At first, he refused, said he didn't want to be a burden. But one evening, as the baby wailed and my husband burned dinner, and I sat on the kitchen floor, laughing in exhausted defeat, Theo stood in the doorway, watching. Then he said simply, "All right, I'll stay." So here we are, a family made not by blood, but by choice. No trust funds, no IQ trophies, no laminated awards, just a small house near a field of evergreens, a kitchen that always smells like cinnamon and roasted coffee, a backyard garden where my daughter once buried a jelly bean and cried when it didn't grow, and a man, thin, gray-haired, still coughing sometimes, who held me when no one else did, and never let go. It started with a letter, a real one, stamped, written in Jasmine's handwriting, the same tight, slanted cursive from when we were kids. though a little shakier now. I recognized it immediately. Inside was just one page. No return address. No pleasantries. Just, "Are you happy?" And then, because I'm not, I can't breathe in this house anymore. My hands trembled as I read, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. Jasmine had become everything our parents ever wanted. A lawyer with multiple degrees, a spotless record, and a reputation as the girl with the mind of a machine. But reading her words, it was clear the machine was breaking. She wrote that her father still monitored her spending, that her mother visited her apartment unannounced, that her dating life was picked apart like a resume. "You're too emotional," they told her. "You're slipping," they said after a single bad week at work. She signed the letter. "Your sister, still, I hope." I showed the letter to Theo. He read it in silence, then nodded slowly. "I knew they'd crush her," he said. "They always crush what they try to own." We wrote back in secret. We arranged to meet her one Sunday afternoon at a bookstore outside Savannah, neutral ground. She wore a blazer and sunglasses, looked thinner than I remembered. Still beautiful, still sharp, but something in her shoulders had folded. When she saw me, she dropped the mask, hugged me like she was 7 again, hiding behind my back from thunder. "I've been watching your life," she said softly. "Online mostly. Quietly. You look real. I want that. Not the titles. Not the applause. Just air." We met every few weeks after that. Quiet cafes. Parks. Phone calls at midnight when she was sure our parents were asleep. I never pushed her. I never said, "I told you so." I just listened, because I knew exactly what it felt like to live on someone else's stage and forget you ever had a voice. It took her 3 years to leave. She waited until her student loans were gone, until her lease was up, until the last family wedding was over, so she wouldn't have to explain herself to judgmental aunts and passive-aggressive cousins. She left a note on the kitchen counter of our parents' house. "I'm not your project. I'm not your investment. I'm done." Then she got on a plane and flew to me. She arrived in Portland with 2 suitcases and a single suitcase of guilt. For leaving them. For becoming like me. For not saying goodbye to Mother properly. I didn't try to take the guilt away, but I gave her space to unpack it. She stayed in our guest room for months. Got a job at a nonprofit doing policy work. Took language classes at night. And every weekend, she helped Theo in the garden, asking him what each plant meant. He started calling her kiddo. She started smiling again. One evening after dinner, she sat beside me on the porch and said, "You know, I'm not sure I even want to be a lawyer anymore." I looked over, surprised. "You're brilliant at it." "I was brilliant because I had to be," she said, "not because I loved it." I waited, let her sit in the silence. Then she said, "Maybe I want to open a flower shop." I laughed. "You with allergies." She grinned. "I'll wear gloves." We both laughed until we cried. Watching her rediscover joy felt like watching spring arrive in slow motion. Not an explosion of color, just one green shoot at a time. Theo adored her. The kids adored her. And for the first time in her life, Jasmine adored herself, even without applause. Then one day a letter came, a real one, from Gwen and Raymond. The handwriting was still the same, bold, controlling, full of old perfume and heavier expectations. They were coming. They wanted to talk. They wanted to reconnect. They said they had things to sort out. Theo read the letter out loud in the kitchen. Jasmine stood with her arms crossed. I sat beside the stove, hands tightening around a mug of tea gone cold. "Well," I said finally, "let them come." Jasmine looked up. "You sure?" I nodded. "They'll come expecting something." "And what will they get?" she asked. I stared out the window, toward the garden where Theo had just planted sweet peas. "Closure," I said. "Ours, not theirs." They arrived on a Monday. Unannounced, of course. I was on the porch, helping Theo untangle garden wire, when I saw them coming up the path, slow, deliberate steps like they still believed the world owed them space. Raymond looked thinner than I remembered. His shoulders sloped. His hairline had surrendered long ago. Gwen wore a beige coat with buttons done all the way up, even though it was warm out. She carried a tote bag, probably full of guilt, or worse, expectations. I stood up and wiped my hands on my jeans. Theo took one look and muttered, "I'll make tea for us." Then he disappeared inside. "Louisa," my mother said first. Her voice was softer, but it wasn't kindness. It was calculation. My father gave a half smile. "You've done well. We're happy to see that." I said nothing. "We thought it was time to put the past behind us," he continued. "Reconnect. Be a family again." I tilted my head. "A family?" He nodded. "Yes. It's been long enough, don't you think?" I stepped forward, just enough for them to notice how much taller I stood now. "And which part do you want to forget first? The eviction, the fake lease, or the part where you threw me away because I couldn't pay to exist in your house?" Raymond's smile faltered. Gwen cleared her throat. "Jasmine is gone." My heart didn't skip. I knew what they meant. "She left us," Gwen added, voice sharpening. "She says she's living here with you. Is that true?" "She's here," I said evenly. "She's safe." "You brainwashed her," my father snapped. "No," I replied. "You broke her. I just showed her how to breathe." There was a pause, the kind that grows teeth. Then Gwen spoke again. "We've had some setbacks. Financial. The company's gone under. The house sold. And Jasmine's not answering." "And?" I asked. Raymond looked directly at me, like this was some boardroom negotiation. "We need help." I blinked. "Help? Yes. We're your parents." "No," I said. "You're strangers. Strangers who share my blood, but none of my history." My mother scoffed. "We raised you until 15. I laughed sharp dry. "You tolerated me until Jasmine's IQ test. After that, I was just extra weight." Raymond stepped forward. "Don't be so dramatic." "You're right," I said. "Let me simplify it." I stepped between them and the door. "You don't live here. You don't get to step into this home and pretend there was never damage done." Gwen's face twisted. "You're really going to leave your parents out on the street?" "I'm not leaving anyone," I said. "You left me. I just never invited you back." They didn't move, so I did. I pushed the door open just enough for them to see inside. Pictures on the wall. Kids' drawings taped to the fridge. Theo's slippers by the stairs. "See that?" I said, voice low. "That's a real family. One built on kindness, not performance. One that doesn't throw people away for being inconvenient." Raymond's face turned a pale, fleshy shade of red. "We're not asking for much." "You're asking for everything," I said. Again. He stepped forward too quickly. His hand gripped my shoulder tight. I didn't flinch. "Let go," I said calmly. "Why are you so angry?" he hissed. "You've won. Can't you just let us back in?" "You never left," I said. "You've been inside my ribs for 2 decades. But not anymore." He didn't move, so I stepped closer, lowered my voice. "Tell me something, Dad," I whispered. "How does it feel to be abandoned by the daughter you once discarded?" He let go. His hand dropped like it was burned. Gwen looked ready to cry. Maybe she finally realized that crocodile tears don't water dead roots. I took one final breath. Then I asked, not aloud, not to them, but inside the quietest part of me, was I cruel today? Or just no longer available to be hurt? The wind picked up. Jasmine opened the door behind me, eyes wide but calm. I nodded to her, then to them. "Goodbye," I said, and I closed the door. This time it stayed closed. I didn't watch them leave, didn't peer through the curtains or wait for the sound of gravel under tires. I just stood there, one hand on the doorknob, the other on my chest, like I needed to hold something in place. Theo came into the hallway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "They gone?" I nodded. "For good this time." He studied me for a long moment. "You okay?" I wanted to say yes, but instead I said I don't know. "But I'm free." That night the house was quiet. Jasmine was upstairs, reading to the kids. My husband was folding laundry, humming off-key. Theo had gone to bed early, said the visit reminded him too much of the old days, and not in a good way. I sat on the back porch, a blanket wrapped around my legs, tea cooling in my hands. I thought about the look on my mother's face, the way my father's voice cracked, not with sorrow, but with disbelief, as if he couldn't fathom that I had grown into someone who didn't need him. Maybe I hadn't grown. Maybe I had simply returned to the girl I was always meant to be, the one they couldn't see, the one they couldn't break. The next morning, Jasmine joined me by the garden. She was in her pajamas, hair uncombed, mug in hand. "I can't believe you said that to him," she whispered, eyes wide with admiration. "The part about being discarded." I shrugged. "It's just the truth." She took a sip. "Still, I don't know if I could have stood that steady." "You don't have to," I told her. "That's why I did." She smiled, and for a moment we were kids again, before the scorekeeping, before the tests, before the wedge our parents drove between us. "I hope I find someone like you did," she murmured, eyes flicking toward the garden where my husband knelt beside Theo, helping him transplant a row of herbs. "You will," I said, "but first make sure you know who you are, so no one gets to decide for you again." She nodded, quiet, then added, "I've decided I'm not going back to law. Not ever." I smiled. "Good." "I want to work with kids," she continued. "Maybe teach. Maybe help other girls like us figure out they're allowed to want things for themselves." My throat tightened. "Then do it," I whispered. Later that week, we finalized Theo's paperwork to join us permanently overseas. We'd been planning it for a while. New job, better climate, a place where the kids could grow up bilingual and barefoot. I walked him through the forms, line by line. He frowned at the long paragraphs, but never complained. "You know," he said, pen poised, "I never imagined I'd get to live somewhere that didn't feel temporary." I looked at him, this man who had once given me a couch and a blanket and a name to cling to. "You're not a guest anymore," I said. "You're home." He smiled. "You always did have a way of making small spaces feel big." I touched his hand. "That's because you did it first." On our last day before the move, I visited the old neighborhood one final time. Not to say goodbye, just to remember. The bakery where I used to press my nose to the glass. The cracked sidewalk I once tripped on while racing Jasmine home. The apartment Theo carried me into, shivering and 17, thinking I had nowhere left to go. Turns out that was the beginning, not the end. I left no forwarding address for my parents. Didn't leave a note. Didn't look back. They had taught me how to survive without love. But Theo taught me something better, how to thrive with it. Some nights I still ask myself, was I wrong to shut them out? Was I cruel, ungrateful, cold? And then I look at my children, at my sister, planting seeds she'll finally let grow, at Theo dancing awkwardly to jazz in the kitchen while holding a grandchild in one arm and a whisk in the other. And I know I made the right choice. They threw water at me and called it discipline. I built a home and called it peace. They gave me nothing. I gave myself everything. And maybe, just maybe, that's the sweetest revenge of all.